All right, so as I mentioned last time, part two, in a way, is a retelling of part one, but Teresa is the protagonist in this section, right? Tomas is kind of the main character in part one. And then in part three, we get Sabina is kind of the big interest, but we also meet Franz, and Franz they kind of share that chapter, I guess you could say. Franz, I don't know. I hope we can get to him today. We might not, because he's kind of, he's a ways into the book. He's almost 100 pages into the book, even though he's a pretty important character. But let's remind ourselves, how does the first chapter, the first part, how does it end? What's the last scene? We ended with? Franz is laying in bed, right? What has he just done? He just went back to Teresa. He went to Prague, and his stomach is grumbling, And then the second part opens with Teresa, and her stomach is grumbling, right? But this is like you're going back in time to the day that she arrived in Prague, when she first got there and she first met, or not when she first met him, but I guess when they fell in love and they slept together and all that. And so, it's sort of an interesting, I like the segue. It's a nice segue, right? You end with Tomas laying in bed like, oh my God, what have I done? And his stomach's all grumbly. And then the second part opens with her and her stomach, right? Well, let's go ahead and just read the opening, the sort of introductory chapter on page 39. Are the page numbers the same in those new editions? Is it the same facsimile? Is it page 39? Okay, cool. All right, I just assumed it was. Okay, so it says, it would be senseless for the author to try to convince the reader that his characters once actually lived. They were not born of a mother's womb. They were born of a stimulating phrase or two, or from a basic situation. Tomas was born of the saying, einmal ist keinmal. Once is never. One time is not at all, right? Teresa was born of the rumbling of the stomach. This is actually kind of, I guess, what you might call very postmodern. I hate to use the term postmodern because it's so loaded, but I guess in literary circles, it's not so much. In philosophy, it is. But the Kurt Vonnegut novel that we read is considered postmodern. Again, I kind of hate to use this term because it's so loaded. But some, and I'll just leave it at this, some particularly English literary critics, things like that, people who have PhDs in literature, sometimes when they talk about postmodern, they're thinking of, in terms of novels that are self-referential. They refer to themselves, that's postmodern. That's a very specialized definition, by the way, right? We could take a whole semester talking about what postmodernism is. But certainly this is an example of it, right? He's like telling you, this is not a real story. This is fake. I made it up, right? And there's a lot of Kurt Vonnegut novels like that. I think Breakfast of Champions, at the end, there's like a scene where he's like, and Dwayne Hubler did this because I wanted him to. I'm the author, I made him do that, or something like that. So yeah, this is very, very postmodern. But what does he say here? Where did the idea of Tomas come from? It's from that German expression, einmal ist keinmal. Tomas likes to have a lot of women. Once is never. But Teresa was a rumbling of his stomach. I guess he was hungry one day, and he thought of like a hungry, young, innocent lady who, very nice, intelligent woman, born in some country, some small rural area, who was just aching for life. The first time she went to Tomas's flat, her insides began to rumble. And no wonder. She had had nothing to eat since breakfast but a quick sandwich on the platform before boarding the train. She had concentrated on the daring journey ahead of herself and forgotten about food. But when we ignore the body, we are more easily victimized by it. She felt terrible standing there in front of Tomas, listening to her belly speak. She felt like crying. Fortunately, after the first 10 seconds, Tomas put his arms around her and made her forget her ventral voices. Teresa was born of a situation which brutally reveals the irreconcilable duality of body and soul, that fundamental human experience. A long time ago, man would listen in amazement to the sound of regular beats in his chest, never suspecting what they were. He was unable to identify himself with so alien and unfamiliar an object as the body. The body was a cage, and inside that cage was something which looked, listened, feared, thought, and marveled. That something, that remainder left over after the body had been accounted for, was the soul. Right, so yeah, again, the title of this chapter is, or this part is Soul and Body. And this is an interesting, I like this passage, it kind of makes you think, what was it like before, when we were cavemen and women, just sort of walking around, and what it must have been like to feel emotions, the first time, you feel passion. Now we have people to explain it, our parents, oh, that's this thing called a heart, and that's what's making that, but before we're just like, what's going on? Why am I, it's just complete, this body's almost felt alien, but we have this awareness of it. What is the soul though? It's just this sort of, it's just as mysterious, honestly. It's just what's left over after you take away all the other stuff. Today, of course, the body is no longer unfamiliar. We know that the beating in our chest is the heart, that the nose is the nozzle of a hose sticking out the body to take oxygen to the lungs. The face is nothing but an instrument panel registering all the body mechanisms: digestion, sight, hearing, respiration, thought. Ever since man has learned to give each part of the body a name, the body has given him less trouble. This, I don't know, he uses a lot of biblical references, and maybe I'm really grabbing for one here, but I couldn't help but think of the story of Adam from Genesis, where he names the animals, right? Like maybe, when we name things, it gives us a sense of being at home. So God's like, I'll let you name everything, and sort of kind of let you feel at home or something like that. Have control of this scary world, or this new world. He's also learned that the soul is nothing more than the gray matter of the brain in action. The old duality of body and soul has become shrouded in scientific terminology, and we can laugh at it as merely an obsolete prejudice. But just make someone who's fallen in love listen to his stomach rumble, and the unity of body and soul, that lyrical illusion of the age of science, instantly fades away. So what is he saying in that last passage? When someone's fallen in love, right? Make someone who's fallen in love listen to the stomach rumble and this unity of body and soul that we now sort of take for granted. I am my body is my soul. My soul is just a sort of function of my brain. But how is it that our stomach rumbling when we're in love? I guess Teresa shows up to Prague. She's got a stomach rumbling. Not only that, but what else is wrong with her? We learned in the first part. Not only does she have, maybe that's why she got sick, right? She's got a fever on top of that. But she's able to sort of like ignore it, right? Because of her love for Tomas. There's some soul in there that's like, I don't care, right? I don't really care. I mean, why don't we, I don't know, this is kind of a morbid thought. Maybe I shouldn't share it with you, because I would never do it, but I had the thought. And I was laying on my couch yesterday, and I was kind of hungry, but also too lazy to go up and make myself something. And my cat was laying there right next to me, and my stomach was and I was I'm imagining before cats were domesticated, they wouldn't have gotten near a human being with a grumbly stomach. You know what I mean? I'm like the fact that I care about this animal. I'm not gonna be lazy and just get a little snack of her belly or something like this, right? But yeah, so I get we ignore the body. I don't know, maybe you've been on a date. I've been on a date before where it was going really, really well, and I hadn't eaten all day, and I just didn't eat. And then after the date, I'm like, oh crap, it came back to me. Just you just lose yourself, you get into the moment. You're, remember, it doesn't have to be a date. Maybe you're just enjoying a game or a movie. You get distracted, and so you neglect the body and you sort of lose yourself. So, and there's this interesting thing. So Teresa seems to have this obsession with her body. She wants it to somehow, it seems like she wants it to be an expression of her soul, and she's falling short of that, right? She's always staring in the mirror at herself, trying to find a glimpse of this uniqueness, right? Her soul is unique, but her mom sort of makes her think, what about her body? Her mom's kind of crude, isn't she? Her mom's like, the body's nothing special. Your body's just like any other body. Why you gotta cover it up? Why you gotta be modest and all this stuff, you know? And so she's sort of haunted by that, it seems. And she wants her body to be an expression of her soul, and she doesn't really quite know how to do that. Maybe that's part of the reason why she admires Tomas. He doesn't say that in the novel, but now I think about it, Tomas seems to be very in touch with his body. His soul and his body don't seem to be so separated. The only time they are is when he's thinking about Teresa. You know, when he's doing the surgery and he's really, or having sex with his mistresses or whatever, like, he's doing what he wants to do. Like, he's expressing his true self. It's only when, like, he's worried about what she thinks and how she's gonna feel and to make her happy where he gets really heavy and the soul kind of separates from the body for him. But I like the way that he describes the relation, because the soul will like relocate itself depending on, you know, what the body is asking for, right? So Teresa's soul moved from the pancreas up to the head and all this we see. This is chapter 3, she tried to see herself through her body. That is why from girlhood on, she would stand before the mirror so often. And because she was afraid her mother would catch her at it, every peek into the mirror had a tinge of secret vice. It was not vanity that drew her to the mirror. It was amazement at seeing her own eye. She forgot she was looking at the instrument panel of her body mechanism. She thought she saw her soul shining through the features of her face. She forgot that the nose was merely the nozzle of a hose that took oxygen to the lungs. She saw it as the true expression of her nature. Staring at herself for long stretches of time, she was occasionally upset at the sight of her mother's features and her face. She would stare all the more doggedly at her image in an attempt to wish them away and keep only what was hers alone. Each time she succeeded was a time of intoxication. Her soul would rise to the surface of her body like a crew charging up from the bowels of a ship, spreading out over the deck, waving at the sky and singing in jubilation. She took after her mother, not only physically. I sometimes have the feeling that her entire life was merely a continuation of her mother's, much as the course of a ball on the billiard table is merely the continuation of the player's arm movement. You know, I don't know if I quite follow what he means by that. I don't see how her life is a continuation of her mother's. Or maybe I don't like the way he's expressing the point he's trying to make. I can see how her mother had a deep influence on her for sure, and it kind of haunts her. But to say that she seems kind of different from her mom, to me, I don't know. So to say that her life is a continuation of her mother, I think is kind of a bad way to describe the character, but maybe I'm missing something. So if anybody has thoughts on that, I'm definitely interested to hear them. But what's the story behind her mother? Her mother wasn't always that way, right? She was sort of a bit of a prudish, kind of like, I'm a badass and I'm real pretty, and cared about the way she looked early in her youth. What's the story behind her mom? She had, 9 suitors or something like this? All these men trying to marry her, and then what happened? Which one did she pick? Or did she pick? She just got pregnant, right? She was taking her time. She's like, well, let's see who gets the best deal. Who's got the best deal? And then one night, some guy just doesn't pull out in time, even though she tells him to, right? Right? What does she say? She says, be careful, very careful, and he wasn't, right? And then after that, her life kind of changes. She sort of once she sort of gets older, she almost does a 180 and becomes this sort of vulgar, I'm not guarding my purity at all. She's like the antithesis of Beatrice from the Sirens of Titan, right? The sort of anti-virgin, the anti-Mother Teresa, or not Mother Teresa, the anti-Virgin Mary, right? At the bottom of 42, Teresa's mother talked no baby talk. She did not talk at all. She thought about the 8 other suitors, all of whom seemed better than the 9th, right? So again, she's just I'm gonna just sort of wait and sort of let them go after me. I don't know, I'd mark that passage, right? I guess I want to remind myself of Teresa's birth, right? It was, in a sense, a lot like the meeting of Tomas and Teresa. It was just a fortuity. It just happened. It wasn't something planned. And on chapter 6, right, we learned that she doesn't know about this. She never knew this, right? She just thinks her mom is just kind of weird, right? Why is her mom so mean and bitter about all this stuff, right? Of course, Teresa did not know the story of the night when her mother whispered, "Be careful," into the ear of her father. Her guilty conscience was as vague as original sin. So she almost knows that she's a burden, or not a burden, but like her mom kind of sees her as like, you screwed everything up. Like, I had like 9 of these dudes, like I was gonna have the pick of the litter, and now I got Teresa. And she doesn't even want to raise Teresa, right? The father raises her. It's not till he goes missing that she has to be sent to the mom. So she kind of begrudgingly. Teresa's she's always been baggage, just sort of like extra, like unwanted, I think is the feeling. But she gives her all, Teresa, right? She's such a good daughter, so dutiful, and does so many things. I think maybe this is why she falls for Tomas. She's like, I want to give. That's just her way. She wants to give herself, and finally somebody is there to take her, I guess. But she wants him to love just her, right? For her special. I'm unique, my soul, I'm the only one, and my body should be tied to that soul. It should be unique too. But yet, you're not really that attached to my body. You're attached to like all these other bodies. You want all these other women. She starts having these crazy dreams of these women at the swimming pool. We'll talk about that in a minute. So she didn't know the story, but it was like her guilty conscience that she had because of this was as vague as original sin. She did what she could to rid herself of it. Her mother took her out of school at the age of 15, and she went to work as a waitress, handing over all her earnings. She was willing to do anything to gain her mother's love. She ran the household, took care of her siblings, and spent all day Sunday cleaning house and doing the family wash. It was a pity because she was the brightest in her class. She yearned for something higher, but in the small town there was nothing higher for her. Whenever she did the clothes, she kept a book next to the tub. As she turned the pages, the wash water dripped all over them. Right? So this is this is body and soul, right? She's washing the dishes, like she's like struggling like with her body, doing all these duties for her mother, but always carrying a book next to her, right? Always having an intellectual higher realm to escape to. Very precocious young lady. Chapter 7. We're talking about her mother here. This is the second paragraph. Her behavior was but a single grand gesture, a casting off of youth and beauty. In the days when she had had 9 suitors kneeling round her in a circle, she guarded her nakedness apprehensively, as though trying to express the value of her body in terms of the modesty she accorded it. Now she had not only lost that modesty, she had radically broken with it, ceremoniously using her new immodesty to draw a dividing line through her life and proclaim that youth and beauty were overrated and worthless. Teresa appears to me a continuation of the gesture by which her mother cast off her life as a young beauty, cast it far behind her. And if Teresa has a nervous way of moving, if her gestures lack a certain easy grace, we must not be surprised. Her mother's grand, wild, and self-destructive gesture has left an indelible imprint on her. Yeah, and again, I don't know if I really follow him here. I don't know if I really agree. So it's like, this idea, to me it seems like Teresa, reading later in the novel, that she kind of, like, she wants her mom to love her and she wants her mom's acceptance, but there's also part of her that's kind of embarrassed about her mom and doesn't want to be like her mom, it seems like. But I guess maybe in a way, maybe when he's talking about this sort of self-destructiveness, remember the dream that she had where she starts like poking herself with pens, her fingers with the pens. She does seem to have this sort of likes to torture herself. She haunts herself with like her imperfections. So maybe, but it seems like her mom's the opposite. Her mom's like, who cares? Like, I'm gonna walk around the house naked. I'm gonna like use the bathroom with the door open. I'm gonna be vulgar and my friends are gonna come over and fart in front of you and laugh about it. We're gonna be like so unladylike or whatever, right? And to me, it seems like Teresa's kind of embarrassed. Again, I'm not quite following Kundera here when I'm saying that her life was a continuation of the same gesture. If anything, I think the character of Sabina is a little bit more like this, especially, I don't know if any of y'all gotten this far in the book yet, but the scene where she puts on the bowler hat and she, her and Tomas have like this, intense lovemaking section. The thing that turns her on about that the most, that gets her really off, is the fact that she feels humiliated, that she looks silly in the hat, that she looks boyish or whatever. And that really gets her off, right? Like, to me, that sounds more like, Teresa's mom than Teresa does. Teresa's mom's kind of like gets a kick out of self-deprecating. She's like, well, I'm no longer that beautiful woman that all these guys want, so I'm going to be the opposite. I'm going to be the most vulgar, disgusting, to sort of rebel against this. He says more about the mom in chapter 8, so let's read there. Teresa's mother demanded justice. She wanted to see the culprit penalized. That is why she insisted her daughter remain with her in the world of immodesty, where youth and beauty mean nothing, where the world is nothing but a vast concentration camp of bodies, one like the next, with souls invisible. So her mom is kind of a mean woman, I think, kind of taking it out on her daughter. You're the reason I don't have the rich husband or the handsome husband or whatever, one of the 9 guys, right? So now we can better understand the meaning of Teresa's secret vice, her long looks and frequent glances in the mirror. It was a battle with her mother. It was a longing to be a body unlike other bodies, to find that the surface of her face reflected the crew of the soul charging up from below. It was not an easy task. Her sad, timid, self-effacing soul lay concealed in the depths of her bowels and was ashamed to show itself. So it was the first time she met Thomas. Weaving its way through the drunks in the hotel restaurant, her body sagged under the weight of the beers on the tray, and her soul lay somewhere at the level of the stomach or pancreas, right? This is like this, the soul travels, right? Her stomach's bothering her, she's got the beer, she's walking out to serve the guest, right? And right now, this is where the soul's at. This is where her drives are. But something else raised him, Tomas, something raised him above all the others as well. He had an open book on his table. No one had ever opened a book in that restaurant before. In Teresa's eyes, books were the emblems of a secret brotherhood. For she had but a single weapon against the world of crudity surrounding her, the book she took out of the municipal library, and above all, the novels, right? Again, so in her crude existence of this sort of living almost the Cinderella life almost, right? It's like the wicked stepmother, but it's actually her mother, right? But she's got that escape in the books, and she sees Tomas with the book, and she feels like this camaraderie. Here's another one of these, another person who likes to escape into novels. That last paragraph in chapter 8. And so the man who called to her was simultaneously a stranger and a member of a secret brotherhood. He called to her in a kind voice, and Teresa felt her soul rushing up to the surface through her blood vessels and pores to show itself to him. After Tomas had returned to Prague from Zurich, he began to feel uneasy at the thought that his acquaintance with Teresa was the result of 6 improbable fortuities. But it is not an event, in fact, more significant. But is not an event, in fact, more significant and noteworthy, the greater the number of fortuities necessary to bring it about. I like this point. I think this is interesting, right? Remember at the end of the last part 1, Tomas is kind of upset because he's thinking like, this only reason I got with Teresa is it's just coincidence. I happened to be in that town because my boss happened to be sick that day, and I had to go, and I happened to go to that one hotel that she happened. There's these 6 fortuitous events that lead, and so he's like, it could have been anybody. And so for him, that discounts it. That makes it less special. But the way she looks at it, and this I kind of like, it makes it more special. It makes it more amazing, right? She likes that's super cool. All these things just happen to happen and we met. It's even more romantic that way. Chance and chance alone has a message for us. Everything that occurs out of necessity, everything expected, repeated day in and day out, is mute. Only chance can speak to us.
We read its message much as gypsies read the images made by coffee grounds at the bottom of a cup. Tomas appeared to Teresa in the hotel restaurant as chance in the absolute. There he sat, poring over an open book, when suddenly he raised his eyes to her, smiled, and said, "A cognac, please." And then what else happens? Beethoven comes on the radio, right? And she remembers a time when she went to go see Beethoven and no one was there except for this one couple, because she lives in a town where no one cares about Beethoven. She's the only one that uses a library or reads books. She goes there, she has a wonderful evening, right? This couple see her there, they invite her to their house afterwards for dinner, they have a lovely conversation. It's a beautiful night. So this music comes on, she sees Tomas with the book, it all just sort of works out. At the bottom of the page there, rounding the counter with Tomas's cognac, she tried to read Chance's message. How was it possible that at the very moment that she was taking an order of cognac to a stranger she found attractive, at that very moment she heard Beethoven? Necessity knows no magic formulae. They are all left to chance. If love is to be unforgettable, fortuities must immediately start fluttering down to it like birds to Francis of Assisi's shoulders. So yeah, I think this is kind of beautiful, and I'm skipping chapter 10 because it's sort of just their conversation. But in chapter 11, he kind of expands on this a bit. Much more than the card he slipped her at the last minute, it was the call of all those fortuities: the book, Beethoven, the number 6, the yellow park bench, which gave her the courage to leave home and change her fate. Yeah, that's right. He had a room key to room number 6, and she got off at 6. So she's like, "Oh, a coincidence. That means we're meant for each other." It's like, she's looking for something, but who cares? It makes it cool. It makes it seem cool. It gives it some fun, right? That's what gave her the courage to leave home and change her fate. It may well be those few fortuities, which are quite modest, by the way, even drab, just what one would expect from so lackluster a town. But it was those fortuities which set her love in motion and provided her with a source of energy she had not yet exhausted at the end of her days. Our day-to-day life is bombarded with fortuities, or to be more precise, with the accidental meetings of people and events that we call coincidences. Coincidence means that two events unexpectedly happen at the same time. They meet. Tomas appears in the hotel restaurant at the same time the radio is playing Beethoven. We do not even notice the great majority of such coincidences. If the seat Tomas occupied had been occupied instead by the local butcher, Teresa never would have noticed that the radio was playing Beethoven, though the meeting of Beethoven and the butcher would also have been an interesting coincidence. But her nascent love inflamed her sense of beauty, and she would never forget that music. Whenever she heard it, she would be touched. Everything going on around her at that moment would be haloed by the music and take on its beauty. And this is another theme I think that runs throughout the novel, is the fortuitousness of beauty. That some beauty is planned, some beauty is prefabricated or preconceptualized, right? And then reified in a work of art, for instance. But a lot of beauty is accidental. Sabina's first painting that she really was proud of, who remembers this? What's the story of that? Remember, so Sabina, she wanted to be a painter, but she wanted to be a weird painter like Picasso, but her dad didn't like that. When she went to school, she was in a communist country, so she had to paint this, communist realism and all that. But the first painting that she actually thought was really hers, what really made it different? It was like just a building, a painting of like some iron structure. But who remembers what happens? It's an accident. She just splattered a little drop of red paint. And it was kind of subtle. It could have, it's just rust. Yeah, I meant to do that, right? So she could have pulled it off if someone would have called it out, but no one noticed it. So she kind of got away with it. But it was sort of abstract. It was sort of weird, and so that was an accidental, like fortuitous occurrence that allowed her to, create something beautiful, at least that she thought was beautiful. on the top of page 52. Early in the novel that Teresa clutched, now we're talking about Anna Karenina, that book where the dog gets its name, right? Early in the novel that Teresa clutched under her arm when she went to visit Tomas, Anna meets Vronsky in curious circumstances. They are at the railway station when someone is run over by a train. At the end of the novel, Anna throws herself under a train. This symmetrical composition, the same motif appears at the beginning and at the end. It may seem quite novelistic to you, and I'm willing to agree, but only on condition that you refrain from reading such notions as fictive, fabricated, and untrue to life into the word novelistic. Because human lives are composed in precisely such a fashion. They are composed like music, guided by his sense of beauty. An individual transforms a fortuitous occurrence, Beethoven's music, Death Under a Train, into a motif, which then assumes a permanent place in the composition of an individual's life. Anna could have chosen another way to take her life, but the motif of death and the railway station, unforgettably bound to the birth of love, enticed her in her hour of despair with its dark beauty. Without realizing it, the individual composes his life according to the laws of beauty, even in times of greatest distress. It is wrong, then, to chide the novel for being fascinated by mysterious coincidences, like the meeting of Anna, Vronsky, the railway station, and the death or the meeting of Beethoven, Tomas, Teresa, and the cognac. But it is right to chide man for being blind to such coincidences in his daily life, for he thereby deprives his life of a dimension of beauty. Right? So, yeah, as he's sort of calling this fiction, he's sort of saying it's a necessary fiction, right? That we do this, and it's what allows us to create beauty, right? So to live a beautiful life. I was reading some secondary literature on Vonnegut a couple weeks ago, and I forgot the name of the writer, so I wish I could give them credit, but they made an interesting point about the Kurt Vonnegut book that we read. You know, all these things happen, you know, in that book, and the way that we typically read it is, oh, well, everything happened because the Tralfamadorian needed a part for his ship, right? So all these people had to do all these things in order for that alien to get the part for his ship. But it's like, well, maybe the alien had to, how do they put it? Maybe the reason the alien's ship broke down and the alien had to get a part for his ship was so that Malachi and B could fall in love, right? Like, you're just saying that one thing is the reason for the other, but they just happen. And you're picking one out and saying that this was for that. They all just happen, but you know, you can reinterpret it any way you like. Maybe you say, oh, it was all just for a stupid ship so some alien could say hello or greetings to, you know. But maybe it's like, no, like even the aliens screwed up, because remember, I think there's a passage in the book where it talks about how the aliens were trying to send messages to Salo and some of them didn't quite get finished. You know, some of them were incomplete. So it's like, yeah, like they were trying and they messed up and it was all a bunch of chance. It wasn't some sort of necessary thing. And if you want to sort of interpret it that way, you can interpret it again as maybe the ship broke down and the part was missing so that Malachi and B could fall in love, or so that Chrono could become a bird boy, or whatever, right? You're just interpreting it. You're making your life into a work of art, sort of thing. And I think Kundera thinks that there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of beautiful. But then we get to these dreams, right? What happens in this dream? The dream where Tomas is in the swimming pool and all these women are like standing around naked, and Teresa's one of them, and he asks them to dance and sing, and if they do something he doesn't like, he shoots them, and then they all fall into the pool. It's actually like, I mean, obviously if you're Teresa, it was probably a terrifying dream, but I was like laughing out loud reading it, because like all the women are like mocking her, especially when like they're all dead in a pile being like called off, and she's like, I'm not dead, I'm still alive, I have to pee. And they're like, we also feel like we have to pee, you're dead. It's like, you know, so this also maybe fits into that whole body soul dichotomy, right? Maybe. But the dream, I guess too, the idea is that these women are all the same, that none of them are special, they're all sort of just naked before Tomas, none of them can please him, none of them are enough. This sort of haunts him. So he brings us up in chapter 15 again. Let me return to this dream. Its horror did not begin with Tomas's first pistol shot. It was horrifying from the outset. Marching naked in formation with a group of naked women was for Teresa the quintessential image of horror. When she lived at home, her mother forbade her to lock the bathroom door. What she meant by her injunction was, your body's just like all other bodies. You have no right to shame. You have no reason to hide something that exists in millions of identical copies. In her mother's world, all bodies were the same and marched behind one another in formation. Since childhood, Teresa had seen nudity as a sign of concentration camp uniformity, a sign of humiliation. There was yet another horror at the very beginning of the dream. All the women had to sing. Not only were their bodies identically worthless, not only were their bodies mere resounding soulless mechanisms, the women rejoiced over it. Theirs was the joyful solidarity of the soulless. The women were pleased at having thrown off the ballast of the soul, that laughable conceit, that illusion of uniqueness, to become one like the next. Teresa sang with them, but did not rejoice. She sang because she was afraid that if she did not sing, the women would kill her. Yeah, she's very intimidated by other women, especially the other women in Tomas's life. She wants to be unique, not just in soul, but in body. She almost wants her body to be her soul. And she can't understand, why can't Tomas see her that way? Right? Why does he have to detach her soul from her body and just pick anybody I guess he does kind of, we mentioned this last time, I think. He does, after he meets her, starts having to get drunk in order to keep doing what he's doing. So maybe there is a little bit of guilt in there. At the end of the chapter, on page 58, why was Tomas the one doing the shooting? And why was he out to shoot Teresa with the rest of them? Because he was the one who sent Teresa to join them. That was what the dream was meant to tell Tomas, what Teresa was unable to tell him herself. She had come to him to escape her mother's world, a world where all bodies were equal. She had come to him to make her body unique, irreplaceable. But he too had drawn an equal sign between her and the rest of them. He kissed them all alike, stroked them all alike, made absolutely no distinction between Teresa's body and the other bodies. He had sent her back into the world she tried to escape, sent her to march naked with the other naked women. Right, so it can, and I don't know if she's really being fair to him about this, right? Because he does really, okay, yes, he's not a faithful partner, right? Obviously, right? Yes. But he does treat her special, I guess. It's just, I guess it's never enough, right? She's got to be the only one. She has to be the only one. She's never going to be satisfied until they move out to the country and he can't have anybody else because she's the only one there is, right? There's this sort of insecurity, right? And that's why I have trouble with him describing her life as a continuation of her mother. She seems to be wanting to reject. Her mother wants to say, all bodies are equal. Your body's just like any other body, right? Kind of rejecting her past. She was this special, pretty princess that all the guys wanted. She screwed that up. Now she's like, oh, it's all the same. Yeah, you have a...
Yeah, so I kind of, in a way, the way I thought about it just now, the way she is with Tomas is kind of the way he sent her back into the world that her mother raised her in.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the continuation of like the way her and Tomas are. That's the continuation of her mother's life.
Yeah.
She doesn't want it to be.
For a different reason, I guess. Yeah.
Like,
she doesn't know what her mom's deal is. Her mom never told her, so she doesn't know why her mom's such a bitch, for lack of a better word. She doesn't know that. She kind of knows why Tomas is. Like, he's just that way. He's just a horn dog that likes to, whatever. But yeah, I guess you're right. It's like, I want to be this unique individual. I want to have a unique body. I want my body to be expression of my soul. My mom wouldn't let that happen. That's why I had to sneak away when I was looking in the mirror.
and be fascinated by my body, to try to find something unique about my body. My mom would walk in, like, why are you getting all this? Nothing special, you know? And so Tomas is kind of like, you're right, maybe this is a continuation of that attitude for different reasons, but yeah, she's kind of in the same conundrum, I suppose. Let me skip, I have that passage, but I'm gonna skip that. Let's go to the bottom, chapter 17. I actually have that whole entire chapter marked, so let's read that. This is an interesting little side passage here. Anyone whose goal is something higher, like Teresa, right? Something higher. Anyone whose goal is something higher must expect someday to suffer vertigo. What is vertigo? Fear of falling? Then why do we feel it even when the observation tower comes equipped with a sturdy handrail? No, vertigo is something other than the fear of falling. It is the voice of the emptiness below us which tempts us and lures us. It is the desire to fall, against which, terrified, we defend ourselves. The naked women marching around the swimming pool, the corpses in the hearse rejoicing that she too was dead. These were the down below. She had feared and fled once before, but which mysteriously beckoned her. These were her vertigo. She heard a sweet, almost joyous summons to renounce her fate and soul. The solidarity of the soulless calling her. And in times of weakness, she was ready to heed the call and return to her mother. She was ready to dismiss the crew of her soul from the deck of her body, ready to descend to a place among her mother's friends and laugh when one of them broke wind noisily, ready to march around the pool naked with them and sing. Yeah, I think you're right. I'm glad you said that. I think that's exactly what he means by the continuation of the mother's life. And I think here too, this is not so clear. It becomes, I think, much clearer later in the novel. I hate to spoil it for you if you haven't got this far, but, well, maybe I can say this without spoiling it. She's kind of wanting to be like Tomas. She's kind of, I think in this passage, she's like, she feels vertigo, right? Vertigo, like literally you're up on a high peak and you're looking over the edge, and it's not that you know that you're on solid ground, but you're thinking like, I could just jump over this. And you're like, oh crap, like, yeah, like you're thinking about it, and like you wouldn't do it, but just like thinking about it gives you this sort of fear of heights or whatnot. So I think she's thinking about, well, what if I had this attitude of my mother? What if I had this attitude of Tomas and just stop being so deep all the time? Right? I'm this person looking for something higher, have my head in novels. Why can't I just fuck? you know, like, for lack of a better word, right? Like they always use the word make love, but no one says that anymore. But you know, why can't I just, like in this novel, making love is the cruder term, but sleeping together is the more, you know, like, because they fall asleep together. That's more sacred. But yeah, like she's kind of like, why can't I let go and just be like Tomas and just enjoy sex for sex? Why do I have to like be his one and only? So I think she's trying to think this way, but when she does, she gets dizzy, right? She doesn't want to join the others. She tries though, like I said, I don't want to spoil the later in the book, but she tries. She tries to do this later in the novel, and it really backfires on her, really bad. In fact, I think it might be, I don't have to think about it when we go back over it again. It might be what seals their fate, because things get really bad after a while. They actually kind of have to leave because of political reasons. I want to try to get to at least a little bit of part 3. So I'm skipping quite a bit here. We learn a lot about the Russian occupation in part 2. A lot more about what happened, and maybe there's something to read into it too. Like there's this image of Dubček, who's like the leader, who was, you know, basically taken away from Prague, disappeared for a while, and then comes back and gives a radio announcement that's like really like, he's like, his voice is nervous. It's obvious that like the Russians probably screwed with them and maybe tortured him. And like, I don't know if this is this actually happened. It's a real event, but I don't know if it's supposed to be some metaphor or something like that kind of fits into the novel. Certainly there is something about the circumstances that they're thrown into, that they're forced to deal with,
it kind of makes them feel like they're in an alien world, right? Throughout the novel, they feel sort of, I guess, this alienation because, later on you're going to see that, the Czechs to sort of confuse the Russian soldiers, they got rid of all the street signs and they were like, so you're not going to find anything, we got you. But it backfires because when they go back to Prague, all the streets are renamed like Stalin Avenue and Lenin Street and, all these Russian names. And so it kind of backfires on them. But let's wrap this up. And I want to start talking about Sabina and Franz. So let's go to the very end of part 2. This is on page 77, the last chapter, chapter 29. Make sure I didn't skip anything else super important before I close this up. Where's the last part that Yeah, that's it. Okay, so on page 77, now we return to a moment we already know about. Tomas was desperately unhappy and had a bad stomach ache. He did not fall asleep until very late at night. Soon thereafter, Teresa awoke. There were Russian airplanes circling over Prague, and it was impossible to sleep for the noise. Her first thought was that he had come back because of her. Because of her, he had changed his destiny. Now he would no longer be responsible for her. Now she was responsible for him. The responsibility, she felt, seemed to require more strength than she could muster. But all at once she recalled that just before he had appeared at the door of their flat the day before, the church bells had chimed 6 o'clock. On the day they first met, her shift had ended at 6. She saw him sitting there in front of her on the yellow bench and heard the bells in the belfry chime 6. No, it was not superstition. It was a sense of beauty that cured her of her depression and imbued her with a new will to live. The birds of fortuity had alighted once more on her shoulders. There were tears in her eyes, and she was unutterably happy to hear him breathing at her side. Right, so I guess this is not superstition, maybe sentimentality or whatnot, but this hearing the bell ring 6 helps dispel her doubts. Again, interesting reaction to fortuity, right? Things that just happen. Tomas is racked with annoyance by it. We just happened to meet. It could have just been anybody. But for her, it provides a sort of poetic beauty, and it actually gives her courage to pursue Tomas or to be responsible for him when he pursues her, when he comes back. Part 3, I like this a lot. Words misunderstood. I guess you could say that even though this part is focusing on Franz and Sabina and how they misunderstand each other and that different words connote different things, and because of that they can't really communicate properly, even though this chapter, this part focuses on them, I guess you could say that this is something that plagues all the characters in the book. Remember, Tomas didn't want to move to Switzerland because he just assumed that Sabina or that Teresa wouldn't want to go, and he was completely dead wrong. So this comes up again and again throughout the book. So who is Franz anyway? What do we know? So we've already talked, I guess. Tomas is the surgeon. Teresa, she was a photographer. Sabina is the painter. What's this Franz guy's story? What's he all about? What's his character? What can we say about him? I think he's sort of the male equivalent of Teresa, right? Tomas and Sabina live their life very lightly, not very heavy. Teresa and Franz, they're pretty heavy, right? They're very similar. What does Franz do though? What's his occupation? Yeah, he's a professor of some kind. I don't know if he's I don't think he really is specific, but yeah, judging from what he says, it's probably something like that, like a philosophy professor or an English professor or something like that, some sort of academic, right? And so he's one of Sabina's lovers, right? She's just, like I said, she's sort of the female version of Tomas, so she's not gonna have some man tie her down. Well, I guess she did. She did have a husband, but now she divorced. She divorced the guy.
much to the chagrin of her parents. In fact, her parents, she's sort of just ultra rebel when it comes to like everything. But then she loses her parents and it kind of hurts her. She's like, oh crap, right? Was my dad that bad? Like he was kind of bossy, but he did it because he loved me. You're kind of. She's one that like Tomas, right? They want to live light, they want to live lightly, but it's hard to do that when you care about people, right? When you love somebody, like your parents or your friend or something like that. You can't just be light all the time. And that's one of the problems with the Camus essay, the Myth of Sisyphus. He doesn't spend sufficient time talking about, it's like, oh, don't take anything seriously? Well, what about your friends? What about your family? It's pretty hard not to if you want to. But this opens up, and this, again, the name of the chapter, the name of the part is Words Misunderstood. He's trying to get her to go to Palermo in Italy. And Gesundheit, and how does she react? She's like, I don't want to see Palermo. And he's like, she doesn't like me anymore, right? Because that's the thing. He doesn't want to cheat on his wife, like in the city that they live in. So he like makes this compromise, like, Franz is married to Marie Claude, I think is the wife's name, Marie Claude. Yeah, Marie Claude. I don't want to cheat on her in the same city. That's not decent. So I'm only going to cheat when I'm on like an academic conference. I'm going to go give a paper, like whatever. I'm going to bring Sabina with me, So he's talking to her about Palermo. Hey, you want to go to Palermo? Nah, not really. My friend went to Palermo, sent me a postcard. It's on the fridge. That's the Palermo that I know. It's like, don't you want to see it in person? She's like, no, I prefer the picture in my head, right? She brings up this story. This is at the bottom of page 82. She tells him a story. Once upon a time, in the early part of the century, there lived a poet. He was so old, he had to be taken on walks by his amanuensis. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it's artist assistant, writer's assistant. Master, his amanuensis said one day, look what's up in the sky. It's the first airplane ever to fly over the city. I have my own picture of it, said the poet to his amanuensis, without raising his eyes from the ground. Well, I have my own picture of Palermo. It has the same hotels and cars as all cities, and my studio always has new and different pictures. Franz was sad. He had grown so accustomed to linking their love life to foreign travel that his let's go to Palermo was an unambiguous erotic message, and her I prefer Geneva could have only one meaning. His mistress no longer desired him. And that's not at all what it is. But you're going to see later on, it becomes that, right? She completely loses interest in him, sadly. Why did she lose interest in him? Who got that far? You don't know? All right, well, we might get that far today, so I'll hold off. How could he be so unsure of himself with her? Had she not given him the slightest cause for worry? She had not given him the slightest cause for worry. In fact, she was the one who had taken the erotic initiative shortly after they met. He was a good-looking man. He was at the peak of his scholarly career. He was even feared by his colleagues for the arrogance and tenacity he displayed during professional meetings and colloquia. Then why did he worry daily that his mistress was about to leave him? The only explanation I can suggest is that for Franz, love was not an extension of public life, but its antithesis. It meant a longing to put himself at the mercy of his partner. He who gives himself up like a prisoner of war must give up his weapons as well. And deprived in advance of defense against a possible blow, he cannot help wondering when the blow will fall. That is why I can say that for Franz, love meant the constant expectation of a blow. And this is why I think there's a lot of similarities between his character and Teresa. I think she kind of thinks of love in a similar way. It's kind of giving yourself up, completely like, being vulnerable to that other person, right? A complete sacrifice of the self to the other. But that's not the way that I think Sabina or Tomas look at it at all, right? And in fact, I think that's kind of off-putting for them. But anyway, she ends up sort of agreeing, all right, let's go to I think she kind of picks up on it. Let's go to Palermo. I can kind of gather from your voice that you really want to go. But yeah, what's the deal with this bowler hat? I guess that's the cover of the book, is this freaking bowler hat. So it's kind of like a big deal for her. This is chapter 2. There's the scene that I don't know, I guess we skipped it, or I'm not really going to read it. It's the scene where she makes love to Tomas. He goes to her hotel room, and when she answers the door, she's just wearing nothing but the bowler hat and her lingerie. And he's like really into it. Like he's like, wow, like they have like the best sex they've had in their life. And this is actually, and I kind of wish I would have marked that passage, because to me, I think this is where Tomas doesn't screw it up. Remember, he screwed it up with Teresa the first night he falls in love with her, because he's overthinking it when he sees her sick and has that image of Moses in the basket. He's like, no, don't do it. You know, he's kind of resisting. But that scene with Sabina where they had that beautiful, you know, sexual encounter was something that it worked, and he didn't get in his head, and it really worked out. And so I think Sabina wants to sort of repeat that. She wants that to come back again, and she tries it on Tomas, and it doesn't work, right? No, she tries it on Franz, and it doesn't work, right? Tomas is turned on by it because he's naughty. He's like, you're transgressing. You're wearing a man's hat. Yeah, it's kind of kinky. But for Franz, he's like, this is just weird and awkward. I don't like it. It just doesn't work. This kind of reminds me a bit of there's an essay by Kierkegaard, and I think he actually published it the same day that he published Fear and Trembling. So I don't know, if there's like some relation, but the name of the essay is called Repetition, and it's been years since I've read it, but so I might not get all the details right. I think like basically the story, it's about a guy who he's a businessman or something who's on a trip. He's sent to Berlin for business one night, and he happens to be done early with his work, and he notices there's an opera in the Berlin Opera House, so he decides to go see the opera, and it's Mozart's Don Giovanni or something, and it's the most amazing show that he's ever seen in his life. And he just remembers that night, and he talks about like, it just was perfect. Berlin, the weather was just so nice, and it was just like, it was just so fortuitous, to use his language. But he just can't imagine a more perfect evening than the evening he had in Berlin. And so throughout the essay, he keeps trying to repeat it again and again. He keeps trying to, what was it about that night that was so magic? Well, it started at 8. I got to see the 8 o'clock showing, right? I saw him in Berlin, so I've got to do it in Berlin. I can't see when they come to Denmark, And so he keeps trying to set things up to sort of recreate that moment. But you just can't do it. It's unrepeatable, right? And so you get sort of fixated with that moment. You try to relive it. And that's what's so beautiful about the moment, is that it can never be repeated. That's what makes it so beautiful, is that it can't be repeated. And I think she's learning this sadly when she tries to pull the bowler hat trick on Franz. It doesn't quite work with him, right? This is weird, right? But let's read the opening of chapter 2. Sabina was now by herself. She went back to the mirror, still in her underwear. She put the bowler hat back on her head and had a long look at herself. She was amazed at the number of years she had spent pursuing one lost moment, right? That moment with Tomas. So what's the deal with the bowler hat? There's a long passage on page 87. It's got all these layers of meaning to it, right? So first, it was a vague reminder of a forgotten grandfather, the mayor of a small Bohemian town during the 19th century. So it originally belonged to her grandfather. Second, it was a memento of her father. After the funeral, her brother appropriated all their parents' property, and she, refusing out of sovereign contempt to fight for her rights, announced sarcastically that she was taking the bowler hat as her sole inheritance. She's a bit of a rebel, right? Her whole life is a life of, we're going to find out later, of betrayal. I want to betray and sort of, go against the sort of authorities. And she doesn't like to be categorized. When she escapes from the Soviets and becomes an artist abroad, she gets all this success, and everyone wants to label her as this this Czech, immigrant who escaped the evils of communism. And she's like, I don't give a damn about communism or capitalism or anything. I just want to be Sabina and have fun. You guys are making things way too serious. And so I think,
this just, I'll just take the bowler hat. That's like, I'm not gonna like fight and take, I should get half the house and I get that from, you know, you're gonna be such a petty brother. You take all the stuff. I'll get the bowler hat. I'm not gonna fight you. Okay, third, it was a prop for her love games with Tomas, that we've already talked about. Fourth, it was a sign of her originality, which she consciously cultivated. She could not take much with her when she immigrated, and taking this bulky, impractical thing meant giving up other, more practical ones. Fifth, now that she was abroad, the hat was a sentimental object. When she went to visit Tomas in Zurich, she took it along and had it on her head when he opened the hotel door. But then something she had not reckoned happened. Okay, I guess this is the passage. The hat, no longer jaunty or sexy, turned into a monument to time past. They were both touched. They made love as they never had before. This was no occasion for obscene games, for this meeting was not a continuation of their erotic rendezvous. It was each of which had been an opportunity to think up some new little vice. It was a recapitulation of time, a hymn to their common past, a sentimental summary of an unsentimental story that was disappearing in the distance. The bowler hat was a motif in the musical composition that was Sabina's life. It returned again and again, each time with a different meaning, and all the meanings flowed through the bowler hat like water through a riverbed. I might call it Heraclitus's riverbed, and Heraclitus, famous for the saying, you can't step in the same river twice. The bowler hat was a bed through which each time Sabina saw another river flow, another semantic river. Each time the same object would give rise to a new meaning, though all former meanings would resonate like an echo, like a parade of echoes, together with the new one. Each new experience would resound, each time enriching the harmony. And again, she mentions Heraclitus, which I think is interesting. I believe the first time he's mentioned in the novel. And Heraclitus is he's a good contrast from Parmenides, another philosopher who was mentioned much earlier in the book. Parmenides spoke of the one. Everything is all one. Everything is one, there's no distinction, we're all sort of... and Heraclitus talks about, well, he's famous for discussing what he calls the logos, which is a Greek word. You know, we've already talked about that. Remember, Viktor Frankl uses the word logos, and for him, it just means meaning. Logos is meaning. But for Heraclitus, the logos seemed to be something like a force in nature, or a way that nature is, a way that the universe is. And for Heraclitus, one of the most important things to know about the universe is that it's always in flux, it's always changing, and the only thing that holds it together is strife. So there's these two principles of flux and strife by which the universe operates, what holds everything together, and what we can construct a logos or an account of. If anyone's at all familiar with maybe like Taoist philosophy, the notion of the yin and the yang, that sort of thing, I think there's a lot of similarities between Heraclitus and the Taoists, right? The Taoists talk about, you know, the way of nature, the Tao is the way. And they also use the river metaphor quite a bit. If you read the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu does talk about rivers quite often, you know, which is it's a good metaphor because a river includes the notion of flux. It's always flowing. You can never step in the same river twice. It's always composed of different water. But there's this, what makes it a river and not just some other body of water? Well, it's the banks. It's the opposing banks, that strife, that tension, which guides the water in a certain direction. So it's constantly flowing, it's constantly moving, but there is a direction to it. There is a sort of logos. There is sort of an account that one can give of this process. So, you know, when Heraclitus sees the universe, he sees a flowing universe, a universe that's constantly moving, that's, you know, never in the same place twice.
and we have to sort of make sense of this, right? As the water flows through, we have to sort of interpret it as it goes. Whereas Parmenides is kind of a rejection of that. For him, that flow and that flux is an illusion. It's us tied to our body and tied to the senses. If we use rationality, we can see that change and flux and all that is just illusory, and really we're all one. We're all this monolithic thing. I don't think that Kundera comes out and says this, but I'm sort of making my own sort of reading of it. I want to say, I think that Tomas and Sabina they're more Heraclitean. Right, these two characters, they're more light. They're, take things as they go, find new adventures, find new things. Whereas, Tomas and Teresa, they want to unify everything. They want everything to be one, for it all to make sense, for it all to be stable and unchanging and unwavering, right? And unique and all this, all that kind of stuff. But now perhaps, this is at the bottom of page 88, now perhaps we're in a better position to understand the abyss separating Sabina and Franz. He listened eagerly to the story of her life, and she was equally eager to hear the story of his. But although they had a clear understanding of the logical meanings of the words they exchanged, they failed to hear the semantic susurrus of the river flowing through them. And so when she put on the bowler hat in his presence, Franz felt uncomfortable, as if someone had spoken to him in a language he did not know. It was neither obscene nor sentimental, merely an incomprehensible gesture. What made him feel uncomfortable was its very lack of meaning. While people are fairly young and the musical composition of their lives is still in its opening bars, they can go about writing it together and exchange motifs, the way Tomas and Sabina exchanged the motif of the bowler hat. But if they meet when they're older, like Franz and Sabina, their musical compositions are more or less complete, and every motif, every object, every word means something different to each of them. And then we get in chapter 3, this is the first dictionary that we get, the short dictionary of misunderstood words, right? And I don't think we have time to really dive into the whole thing, but in fact, maybe we should pause here. We've only got, like 5 minutes left? What time are we supposed to? We're supposed to be done at 12:45, aren't we? Is that right? 12:45? Yeah, we better just stop, because if I get started on this, then I'm gonna keep going. So, okay. I'm glad we got into at least part 3. It won't take us long to finish the rest of it. If you haven't, do so. Finish part 3 over the break. Finish part 4 as well, and at least get started on part 5. I try to knock it out, but it's pretty long, so at least get started on it. If you got here a little bit late, stick around. I'll call roll one more time.